Hello and welcome to Informed Dissent. This is your news of the week for the week of March 7th, 2026. The Supreme Court hands parents a major victory in California gender secrecy case. In a 6-3 ruling in Marabelli versus Bonta, the court reinstated an injunction blocking California schools from hiding students' gender presentations from their parents. The court is also watching Foote v. Ludlow. The justices conferenced Friday on whether to take Foote v. Ludlow, a case that could establish a binding nationwide standard for parental notification in schools. EEOC overturns a 2015 ruling, affirms single-sex bathrooms in federal workplaces. In a 2-to-1 vote, the EEOC held that federal agencies may maintain single-sex bathrooms and exclude trans-identifying employees from opposite-sex facilities. The commission clarified that Bostock addressed hiring and firing, not bathroom access. The ruling currently applies to federal agencies only. Women's forum critical of gender ideology banned on Reddit. What a surprise. A women's subreddit was banned following what users describe as a coordinated campaign led by a trans-identified male moderator with a prior domestic violence charge. The pattern of women's spaces being removed from the platform is well documented and ongoing. Next up, in our first segment, we're joined by civil liberties attorney Laura Powell to walk us through what Marabelli versus Bonta actually means for parents, for schools, and for the cases still to come. In our second segment, we sit down with researcher Kevin Waldman and writer Ben Appel, whose recent piece in The Atlantic has been making waves. Two people doing important work on what it means to be gay right now, and why that question matters more than ever. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to Informed Dissent. This is our show for the week of March the 7th. We're going to have 3 guests today. Laura, don't worry. You're the only one right now. We're going to have 2 guest segments, but our first is going to be a discussion with Laura Powell. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Laura is going to be here to basically help us understand what happened at the Supreme Court this week. What is a shadow docket? What is some of the fallout that we saw from this case, and basically what we can expect to go from here. But Laura, I would love first for you to, if you're willing, give our listeners a little bit of maybe a background about who you are and how you even know about this topic.
Well, I'm a mom. I'm a lawyer. I've increasingly been doing investigative sort of reporting as a citizen journalist. Founded a group called Californians for Good Governance in 2021 to advocate in Sacramento. Started paying more attention to what was going on at the state level. And so I got drawn into more of these issues related to schools and what's going on in the state. I come from a background of politically left, so I'm increasingly, allied with conservatives, but that's not the background I came from. Left the Democratic Party after I started going to Sacramento and seeing how they were running the state and the kind of insane policies they were passing. This issue is sort of, I got a bee in my bonnet about it when it exploded on the scene in 2023. Mostly just because the Attorney General, the State Attorney General, Rob Bonta, was lying about the law. And that really bothered me. He was saying that there were cases that said a child has a right to privacy. And I look at the cases and they're not saying what he said they said. And I started speaking out about it. So, and you start looking at this. We haven't quite introduced the topic, right? But it is sort of it really breaks down really quickly if you start looking at the arguments why they want to keep secrets from parents. They're not rational arguments. So that bothers me too. So that's one of the reasons I've been speaking out about it, because it's so clearly wrong-headed how they're approaching this.
Let me
Could you
ask.
actually give us an example of some of the arguments they're using and maybe point out some of the ones that on the surface kind of sound good, but
Well,
as you kind
yeah.
of pull it apart, it's the logic falls apart?
Well, they say, we're talking about where a child is identifying as a different gender at school, has told the school they want to be called a different name and treated as a different gender, and they haven't told their parents, and they have informed the school that they don't want their parents to know. So what people say is, well, there must be a reason if they don't want their parents to know. Um, the reason is, they don't want to deal with their parents knowing, they don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. The implication is that the parents must be abusive, right? When they say there must be a good reason. If the child doesn't want to tell their parents, we're just going to trust that there's a good reason. Well, that isn't really a rational. I mean, if you've been a teenager, you recall, I mean, you don't want to tell your parents everything about your personal life. It's uncomfortable. That's, does not point to abuse. And then when they say, well, some parents are abusive. Okay. But if you think the parent might be abusive, you need to call CPS, they're required by law to take certain steps if they suspect a parent is abusive. They don't do that. And they don't do anything to help this child except to help them keep secrets. They send them home to this supposed abusive household. They're there all summer where the teachers are not there to protect them from these parents. The only action they're taking is calling them by a different name. And then you also look at the fact that everybody on at the school knows that this child is identifying differently. So when the opponents say this is forced outing, the child is out to
Hmm.
everybody but the parents. And so it's really, if they really are concerned their parents are going to harm them, it creates a false sense of security because anybody could spill the beans at school. They could just, any student parent without even knowing could tell the parents. So it's kind of a ridiculous framework. And then one of the other problems that happens is, which of course you see a lot of, is conflating sexual orientation and gender identity. So you can argue that there's certain rights to privacy with respect to sexual orientation because that's an inherently private subject. Um, it is different when you're talking about the name and gender somebody openly identifies as. This is not something that you can argue is private. If the child is going around saying, this is my name, and to say that's private information doesn't make sense. So any argument about this being a private topic is very different when you're talking about sexuality versus name and gender. And of course, one of the things that happens too is they've equated gender ideology and gender identity and sex under the law. They're saying they're exactly the same thing. And if they're exactly the same thing, then that's not private information. Name and sex is just, what people know about you.
Yeah.
Can I ask just a couple follow-up questions about you personally? So,
Mhm.
what kind of lawyer or what kind of law do you or did you practice? Was there something specific in your background?
Well, I started off doing human rights law, but realized that isn't really so much of it isn't so much law, and there isn't much to do in that area. And I ended up doing criminal defense as a public defender, and I done that for years and years. So all of this, it's fairly related because not all lawyers, most lawyers, do not deal with constitutional rights at all in their work. What you think of as law is, most lawyers have much more boring issues they argue about. But in criminal law, you do argue constitutional rights on a daily basis. So that's kind of how it, works together as it's related. And, there's some stuff I draw on too from the international law when we talk about parents' rights and children's rights. And the proponents of these secrecy policies frame it as if these two are in conflict, and parents' rights and children's rights are not in conflict. And this is a well-established thing in international human rights. When you look even at this children's rights convention on the rights of the child, it talks about parents being the guardians of the children's rights in many ways. Children are not expected to be treated like adults. That actually harms children's rights. They're not prepared to advocate for themselves. So that's another issue that comes in when you look at these privacy issues. Under federal law, parents are the guardians of their children's privacy rights. So the idea that you try to, once you take away the protection of parents, you put children in a vulnerable position. And that's exactly what happens here. You cannot rely on school employees to take the place of parents, and to make these decisions about how a child should handle whatever gender identity issue they're dealing with.
So this case this week was
Mhm,
not argued in front of the Supreme Court.
mhm.
It was decided through the shadow docket. Can you explain what that means?
Well, what was going on with this case? And this always gets confusing when you try to describe this. The district court put a permanent injunction on any policies um, preventing teachers from informing parents about children's gender identity. That went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which stayed the injunction pending the appeal. So that then it's like the injunction didn't happen on a temporary basis, at least, while they were going to hear, the full courts move slow. So they haven't heard the full arguments. So they temporarily stopped the injunction that stopped the law, right? It gets confusing. So the Supreme Court undid the stay that stayed the injunction. So now we're back to the district court case coming in. So this is just, procedurally, it's just to deal with the stay on the injunction. The arguments and writing all these deeper briefs and doing all that would be a full hearing on the merits, which would take a lot more time. And that's one of the things that Dissent criticized. I mean, the Dissent was mostly focused on criticizing procedure and not on the substance, and saying until we've heard the full arguments, we shouldn't be prejudging. One of the things, though, when you look at injunctions and stays, one of the factors the courts look at is the likelihood of success on the case. So they are called upon to prejudge the case without hearing all the evidence and everything that would eventually come in. But of course, we do have 2 years of hearing and evidence at the district court level, that there is a record out there at least, but the court did go more into the substance than you might expect for this kind of procedural posture, if that makes sense.
Yes. So the court then reinstated provisions of the injunction.
Yes.
Okay. So some of those provisions included that schools may not actively deceive parents about a child's gender presentation at school, such as by using different pronouns with parents other than with the students or blocking parental access to records or by lying. This element was really interesting. I have some follow-up questions to this coming up one. Once a parent has communicated an objection, no school employee may use a child's preferred name or pronouns. No school, I want to come back to that one. No school employee may be punished for communicating to parents that their child has changed their name or pronouns. And then this one's also interesting. California must explicitly state in PRISM teacher training and any other state-created gender instruction that parents and guardians have a constitutional right to be informed if their child expresses, quote, gender incongruence. School employees have a constitutional right to inform parents when a student expresses gender incongruence. Furthermore, these rights are, quote, superior to any state or local laws, state or local regulations, or state or local policies on the contrary. Can I ask you about the second one? Do we have
Okay.
any answer if if there are two parents who are legal guardians and do not agree, and one parent says, yes, use the child's preferred name or pronouns, and one parent says, no. Do we have any idea how that gets resolved?
That's a hard one. I mean, I've been trying to tease out implications. I have not thought of that one. I think there's going to be a lot of questions like that. Um,
But for
this is
right now,
way, I mean, I'm looking at the injunction. Were you reading from, what were you reading from there?
actually, our writing team writes up
Okay.
a weekly
Okay.
news roundup, and I was looking at their news
Okay.
roundup
So I'm looking at the injunction
itself.
that's back. Yeah. So it says where a child's parent has communicated their objection. I mean, based on that, I'm thinking it means one parent is enough. I don't know. There's certainly things like that. And I think there were some issues that the Court of Appeal cited that were problematic. And, you try to craft these things if you're the judge as well as you can to cover every situation. But I think there are some ambiguity. I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think. Over
Isn't
the
there though like kind of some precedent where like if we're talking about medical interventions at least, like parents have to agree if they both have custody. So I can see how this could cover, but like one parent can't really consent for the other, and that in essentially puts the school against either parent, depending on which side they're on. That seems like a very messy place for a school to want to be
Yeah.
in. They don't, why would they wouldn't want to be involved in that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking the way I'm reading this is like the default is pronouns that match biological sex, right? And
Yeah.
that if one, I mean, that's how I would guess. But yeah,
Right.
these are little thorny cases that could come up. But I mean, there was other things in what you read, right? That anyway, we can go on with the.
What do you know about, or have you heard of this PRISM teacher training?
So one of the things that happened, it's a mandatory training, and one of the things that happened over the course of this lawsuit was that there had been guidance. It was the frequently asked questions page that was up since at least 2016, the California Department of Education website. And this is sort of the source of this belief that there was a legal obligation to hide this information from parents. So this was taken, the Department of Education said, oh, it's just guidance, but everybody, it's authoritative guidance. When the Department of Education says you're legally required to hide
Yeah.
this information from parents, people believed it. It's been repeated for years and years and years. So during the course of this lawsuit, they removed that page and said, okay, the lawsuit's moot now. Because see, we took away that guidance that was your basis for suing us. But the problem is they never took it back. They never replaced it with an announcement. Actually, that was wrong. We've been telling you guys the wrong thing for, 10 years. So there is this mandatory training, and the lawyers discovered that in this training, it continues to send the same message they have been sending for years, even after there was a preliminary injunction in this case. So the judge had like threatened sanctions, that basically the lawyers had been lying to the judge about what was going on, misrepresenting what they were telling people. So that's where this PRISM training comes in. And there is, if I mean you want to pull it up, there is in the record screenshots and whatnot that show what they were continuing to teach teachers. And I actually just discovered yesterday, browsing their website, they have a page that talks about this newer California law that this is another thing that creates a lot of confusion of whether this law is overturned at this point. But on the page with information about that, they added, since this week, they added the notice that the judge had ordered them to do in December. This notice saying parents have a constitutional right to this information. So they put that on the page, but they didn't change the content of the rest of the page. And the rest of the page says children have a right to keep this information private. and the same position they've been taking. So it's contradictory. They're still sending out the message, that there's a right to privacy for children with respect to this information, despite having lost in court all the way up to the Supreme Court level on this issue.
It's almost nonsensical because, as you pointed out, they only have a right to privacy from their parents in this particular issue. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, well, they have the right to privacy from anyone. I mean, I think that if you look at these gender support plans that are used, they write the children can sit there and list all the people who are allowed to know and all the people who aren't allowed to know, and that's expected to be accommodated. And some of these, now I can't remember if it was this case or another one, where there were emails they put in the record of all the teachers having to email back and forth of what pronouns each kid was using and who's allowed to hear which pronouns. And I mean, it's the burden on teachers just seemed crazy to keep up this deception and giving children that bizarre level of control that you should use this pronoun with that person, like a list for each child, really seems unworkable.
The phrase you just used, that bizarre level of control, it's my experience children love or desire the idea of that, but when it actually becomes the burden on their shoulders, it's actually oftentimes more harmful to kids to shoulder that than it is in any way a benefit. Children don't actually, they want the adults in the room to be the adults in the room.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard from, experts in child development, that children really want that structure. I think that's a parenting trend we have, right? Away from parents dictating what to do and, instead having the children have more involvement. Maybe there's some balance between the old-fashioned way of doing things, but children definitely want structure. And I just imagine how scary it is when they say, oh, okay, for children who are even in preschool, we don't know what gender you are, you decide. I mean, how are you supposed to figure that out? That's not supporting children's rights. Autonomy for children is not supporting their rights. Supporting their rights means supporting their parents. Parents' rights and children's rights are all intertwined, and that's because it's the parents' job to provide that structure and those answers.
Can you help me understand this section from a legal framework?
Mm.
The court also found that parents, and this is where you're saying that they were judging if they're likely to succeed. So procedurally, the court was saying, we think if we heard the whole case, the parents are likely to succeed on their 14th Amendment substantive due process claim. What does this mean?
Well, that's where things get a little controversial in the dissent. The substantive due process, a lot of the rights come from this idea that there's sort of a fundamental right that you have that's sort of implied in the Constitution. And that's where we had abortion, where Roe v. Wade was based on. So this was overturned, of course, and the conservative justices tend to dislike this doctrine because it allows judges to declare certain, there's a new right and there's a constitutional basis. So that was in the dissent. You see this criticism because a lot of those conservative judges are not big fans of the doctrine of substantive due process. And I think Clarence Thomas is probably the one who's the biggest opponent of it. The concurring opinion addresses this pretty well and says, well, no, it's just that it had gotten out of hand. It's not that we're completely rejecting the idea of substantive due process. For something like parents' rights, it predates the Constitution. So this is something that would have already been considered. I forget the language they use, part of an orderly society, something. And, to me, this makes sense because I think if you had asked when they were writing the Constitution, you see certain rights enumerated because those were concerns that were on their mind. I don't think anybody would have thought that the idea that parents maybe don't have a right to direct the upbringing of their children would even ever be in question. So it's not something you would write down explicitly. We have the precedents on parents' rights go back are pretty old, over 100 years old of some of the lead cases that spell out, of course, parents have the right to control how they raise their children, and it's not the government's business unless there's a situation where the parent is abusive. And then they have rights before the government can step in, right? They have to prove that parent was abusive. And one of the things that goes on here is that they presume every parent is abusive, basically. Like, we can't identify who's abusive, so we're just going to have a system that accounts for abusive parents that applies to everybody. And this has already been explicitly dealt with in Supreme Court cases where they say you cannot do that. That is a violation of the rights to treat them all as abusive. That allows the government to act as the parent. Um, so I don't know if that's a good answer to try to substantive. I knew you guys, it's always the non-lawyers who ask these difficult questions, like define substantive due process.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just it is challenging. I mean, my background is in clinical research, and Lauren's is in a lot of different things. Um, but it is, I think, challenging for a lot of people because the way that a lot of these issues feel like they're going to be answered or hashed out are going to be through the courts. And they're going to be, in some ways looking back. Historically, parents have always, like you're saying, you know, the founders of our country never even thought that parents would be being challenged about their right to direct their children's upbringing. And yet here we are, where something so substantial in the child and family's life has been happening in secret away from parents now across this country for a number of years. Um, it's challenging for non-lawyers, I think, to feel like we just know that this is not right. And how is it that we can explain, our rights without having the legal language for it? It just seems like what we have as parents, the right to raise our own kids.
yeah. I mean, I think sometimes that it's not really that different what judges do. I think they look at things and say, well, I can tell this isn't right, and let's figure out why.
Why? Okay.
And then they find that's how it's sort of a legal realist point of view that I always feel is how things kind of work. I mean, the other component here too that I think that the majority opinion leans heavily on freedom of religion, the free exercise clause as well. And I think that ties into a case from last year, Mahmoud v. Taylor, that emphasized a parent's right to raise their children and to opt out of curriculum that conflicts with their religious beliefs. I mean, I would like to see that expanded, and I don't know if the court is going to get an opportunity or would do that, but expanded a bit beyond religious beliefs, that they don't have to be religious in nature. I know that the precedent isn't like, it doesn't mean you have to be part of an organized religion. But if you have beliefs that are of a religious nature, I think I've tried to encourage people who aren't religious to frame their beliefs as religion. It doesn't have to be about a specific God, a specific religion. They have to think the language is stuff like it has to occupy the same kind of place in your life that religion would, which I think a lot of people have things like that, beliefs that do occupy a place like that. But I think that the court's looking to have more strength in parents' rights to opt out of a lot of things. And I think part of the problem, schools are really getting out of their lane. This is a big, what bothers me a lot, and I have two kids in public school, is how much they're not focused on academics. They're focused on all these other things. And so you definitely see, ideological approaches, some of these cases where the Mahmoud case dealt with, it wasn't just that there were gay characters in a kid's book. The point of the book was to teach kids that being LGBTQ is okay. And I don't know why we need the teachers to decide that. I mean, that's up to the parents. Parents are allowed to teach their children to, that it's not okay. It's up to the parents to decide what kind of values. And it's the school doesn't need to decide these are the values we all should have. So we're going to teach your kids to have certain values. And meanwhile, our schools are not performing well, right?
I'm just going to go out there on a limb and say, as a lesbian, I actually completely agree that it is not the school's place to be stepping in and teaching children whether or not. Um, I just don't think it's the school's place to really address sexual orientation at all. The only thing that I've ever felt like I've needed from the school in this place is that if I tell you that my partner, if I fill out our registration forms and this is me and this is my partner, and you send everybody else's partners the invite emails to the teacher parent meeting, you send one to my partner too. And that if we show up for the parent teacher meeting, you don't turn us away because we're homosexuals. I mean, but I don't need.
Well, there's a line there too. Like there's a difference between schools not wanting people to be discriminated for their sexual orientation and kind of crossing that line into saying morally it is okay. Like I personally, obviously, I'm a lesbian. I don't think there's anything immoral about being gay, but I also understand that there's a difference between in our pluralistic society, what we all agree are rights and protections versus the way we raise our children in a certain belief structure. And I think the schools have kind of crossed that line. And if they can do it in this way, it can also happen the other way. So I do think it's in the interest of gay and lesbian parents to recognize that we do not want the schools or the government at all making those decisions about ideological and morality for our children, for our families, because it could very easily go the opposite way.
Yeah. With this Mahmoud case, um, I sent a letter to our school principal saying, I would like to be informed, and it's my right, in any lessons dealing with LGBTQ issues so that I can determine whether they conflict with our religious beliefs. And there was some back and forth, but one of the things she did was refer me to this district's anti-bullying policy. And I found that, offensive. And the fact that I wanted to review any ideological, actually what I said is anything, because this is what I think the case said, anything that is normative, that promotes a view of
Yeah.
LGBTQ issues. And so she sends me the anti-bullying policy as if now she's presuming that my child might bully other kids who he thinks may be LGBTQ because I don't want them, you know, to teach morality on this issue to my child. I find that interesting that now I'm seen, as an enemy, my child is seen as a bully. It's one of the things, though, that they do this very strange language where they say, oh, this is for the safety. Like, I was looking at the curriculum and they have books that promote being trans for middle schoolers and well, one book in particular. And they said, well, this is for the safety. The reason why we have this book is we have a requirement to have safety and inclusivity. I'm like, how does this book promote safety for trans kids? That's the idea. But everything, they use this language that doesn't make sense to justify
Yeah.
their policies.
Now, this Supreme Court, Mirabelli, so it's not just confined to parents in California, though, right? Because it went to the Supreme Court, so the ruling, or is it considered a ruling? Because
Yeah.
but it would apply to any parents in any state that if they wanted to opt out, they could,
So
or if they
I was a
were,
little, yeah. I was a little confused. I've heard a couple of different takes on this. I think the answer, this is what I've come to, and I could be wrong, is that technically it applies just to California because that's what this case is. However, there is an opinion from the Supreme Court that lays out their views on this issue. So it would be kind of crazy for courts to ignore that. I think so. Yeah, I think it is binding everywhere in that sense because even though technically, right,
Right, like if
they've
somebody wanted to,
said,
they could
you
kind of
know,
push it, they could push it through the district courts, but once it got to the Supreme Court, they'd be like, no, we already decided this. No.
yeah. And
Okay.
I think a district court ignoring this would be, that would fail in their duties.
Okay.
I, I do want to clarify, though, the Supreme Court could still take, there are two other cases that are
Mm,
percolate, is that the word, percolating? Um, on this concept. So I think that Foote v. Ludlow and Littlejohn v.
yeah.
School Board of Leon County are both still, I think that the court is still deciding, are they going to hear both of those? They could combine them like they did with the sports cases. They could hear one of them. And I think it's interesting just on a personal level. I mean, the Littlejohn case is, friend of the pod and friend of ours, January Littlejohn's case out of Florida. And I believe that Foote v. Ludlow is Aaron Lee's case out of Colorado. Um, so the Supreme Court, I think that the Supreme Court might have more to say on this still if they take one of these two cases.
Yeah, they have more to say. I think they've signaled, I mean, they're signaling here. I think there's been other cases where there's been like a denial of certiorari, right? That means that they decided not to hear the case. There was I think, a statement from Alito on a case not too long ago saying he would have granted and why. I think they definitely are signaling they want a parents' rights case. The question is sometimes the case is not the best one for them to decide. There could be problems with the facts that kind of would force them to grapple with something. So that's why some cases get turned down, even though they definitely would like to hear a case. And I don't know when this is airing, but actually by the time this airs, they may have
Yeah,
decided on one of
yeah,
those
I think
cases.
they're, I
I mean, it could
think
have
they're
already happened, I think, right now. It's being considered today again. And the fact that there was this push in the dissent, um, she brought up those cases. Kagan, who wrote the dissent, yeah, we might see those cases granted, or maybe it'll be a different case.
okay.
So you
Let's
said
talk.
Kagan's dissent was mostly her dissent was based on procedural. What was her issue with the
But
procedures?
She just
Laura,
Sorry.
didn't like
before you
the,
answer that, though, can we just point out, so the decision was 6-3, and who were in the dissent? And because I'm pretty sure they were all Democratic
yeah, it's not
women.
hard. It's
Okay.
Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson. But yeah, it was mostly just criticizing them for deciding too much without hearing the full case, that they
Okay.
shouldn't be using this emergency docket to make these, more substantive declarations. And but yeah, she doesn't say much. And in fact, I think there's a quote from her. It kind of sounds like, well, of course parents have rights.
I mean,
Um,
but what would her ideal case be that came up through this shadow docket? Like did she give any parameters about
no, I think she's
why?
saying they just shouldn't use the shadow docket, that they should have just let the stay in place and waited until the Court of Appeals heard it and it got to them before they made these
Okay.
proclamations.
Okay.
I, I think there's a right to criticize the use of the shadow docket. I mean, it has been being used, I think, more and more and more. And also, I think in some ways it confuses some people. I say this a lot. I used to be an NPR daily listener, and I really relied on Nina Totenberg to understand and explain to me the Supreme Court. And you had this sense for people who followed that the Supreme Court heard cases through the year, and come summer, they kind of dumped all of their decisions. And when they're using the shadow docket, often you're getting decisions throughout the year on a little bit more of a rapid pace. And I think the court, I don't entirely understand why the court is doing that. Are they just trying to deal with the number of cases, the backlog? Do they want to weigh in?
I am not have some big opinion about the shadow docket, so I'm not going to give you that take. I just, thought about this case and why they may have wanted to put this out there to tell everybody this is how we are eventually going to rule on this issue, knowing that this deals with children and there are children being affected and you can't go back. Courts are slow. It'll take years before
Yeah.
this gets to them, depending on which case, but like this case before it goes through the whole process. And so they're telling, they wanted to get that out there. I don't know. That's my take on it.
So
Well,
with the
especially with social transitions, if you're talking about a kid who's 10 and it takes years to get through the docket, are they then being socially transitioned through high school? And by the time the case reaches, like, the damage has been done. So I understand their sense of urgency.
So
Yeah.
what happens now? I mean, you're in California. What happens now? Is there like, did teachers wake up in California this week and did they
Yeah,
have to like
our
call
parents getting
parents?
our parents getting notified that their kid has been transitioned in school.
I am waiting to see. I have been looking all over trying to find out what the guidance from the official guidance that's going to the schools and from the lawyers and all these groups that have been supportive of secrecy policies. So I'm looking to see what they're putting out there. And like I said before, the Department of Education still has up on their website that children have a right to privacy with this information. So
Yeah,
that is still the message.
I saw something from the California Teachers Union saying that they kind of basically saying they disagreed with the opinion and every child deserves privacy and et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like that's not a great sign to me when you're directly kind of as an organization, as an institution saying, well, the Supreme Court was wrong and we disagree and this is all like that's very confusing for the teachers themselves. Like they don't know, then they don't understand their own legal standing. Um, yeah, it was the California Teachers Union that
Yeah.
posted. Yeah. And that's a
I
huge California Teachers Union. I mean, if you're a teacher in California, you're in the California Teachers Union, right? So they're still getting this confused messaging from on high.
Yeah. I think they're going to look for ways to not comply too. I mean,
Right.
I found my experience with the Mahmoud case coming out and saying, I mean, and it also, as they affirmed in Mirabelli, that was meant that case is not narrow. It happened to deal with an LGBTQ book, but it's much broader than that. And so potentially anything that conflicts with the parent's religious belief, they should be allowed to opt out of. And I'm finding, as I've attempted to exercise this, there's a lot of barriers, and they put the burden on parents to do. They told me, what's the specific element of the curriculum that you're objecting to? And I'm like, where's the curriculum? That I can read every single thing. You need to tell me, here's the topic. You tell me when you're going to address it so I can review that. But I think you might see similar things. I actually saw this was Illinois lawyers on YouTube because I was trying to find out what people were saying on the other side. They're education lawyers that, I think they represent school districts, and they're talking about, well, what are schools going to do? Well, maybe we'll just put a thing in the handbook that says what our policy is for kids with gender identity issues and how we handle it. And if the parent wants to notify, opt out of that, they have to let us know. So they may approach something like that, put the burden on the parents to say, I would like to be told if you're socially transitioning my child at school, which is kind of crazy to me that you would expect every parent to say that. And you can't just say, no, the default is we don't do that unless we inform the parents.
But
And parents would have to like specifically request curriculum. They'd have to be reviewing all the curriculum. Like
Well,
that's kind of
that, yeah,
that's
and
that's
kind
how
of a
they're
big
approaching
job.
it.
But it
Yeah.
also circles back to something, Laura, you said earlier, which is that the minute that you are the parent that does that, the minute that you're the parent that sends that email and says, I want to exercise my rights, I think you are correct that the schools then, it changes the view. You are now um, the squeaky wheel or the cultural outlier, or are you the bully? And I think what I find too as a parent in a public school system is that when you pull apart this case or the Mahmoud case, what these cases are built upon, though, is this whole culture right now where the schools feel or act like they own our children. And that there is already this dynamic where the schools have this sense of we know better than the parents. And the minute that when they put it so that we have to be the ones to say no, or we want to use our rights or stand up, it really does change the dynamic and how you're welcome in the building anymore and how you're seen as a cooperative part of that school. And I don't know how we address that wider cultural issue in our schools right now, but it
Yeah.
it really is there.
But it also requires that parents be aware. And I think a lot of, like, I've heard so many parents who were totally unaware of the trans phenomenon at all until their child came home and said, I'm trans. So how would you even know to look to opt out of these things if you are unaware until it, comes it walking in your door? I mean, it just, I don't know. It's a tough
Especially
time to
with,
be a parent.
we have a lot of immigrant families where I live. I mean,
Right.
imagine that. How would they even know or, figure out what the process
Yeah.
is? Yeah, I just would like the schools to stay in their lanes. That is
Yeah.
my overarching thing. There's the social emotional learning that they use to talk to kids about their feelings all the time. And I'm like, I really would like them. I mean, I'm in an underperforming district, and I just can't believe all the energy put on things other than
Yeah.
academics. And they had a sex ed course in fifth grade was 10 hours, 10 weeks for fifth grade sex ed. And, it covered all kinds of things. It was how to deal with your emotions or whatever, all kinds of different things. It wasn't just about sex, but why? Why do they need to teach my kids about personal relationships, all the time? This is the main focus. But
Yeah. Yeah, and
there
there are kids, some kids like if you're constantly telling kids like, how do you feel? Do you have anxiety? Kids don't know what anxiety is. They don't actually know they don't know the internal physical feelings that connect to the words that these people are telling them. I mean, I don't know, could they just teach them math and reading
yeah. I mean, they'll
instead of,
find the anxiety if you ask them to
yeah,
look for it. I mean, you've read
right,
Abigail Schreier's Bad Therapy.
Yeah.
To me, I feel like that's a must read to really make this point in a very understandable way that it is
right,
not helpful to constantly ask
right.
children about their emotional states and have them
Yeah.
focused on that.
Well, like you said, they'll find the anxiety, but also they could be labeling something else as anxiety when really it's just somebody hurt my feelings because they're kids and they're not emotionally mature.
Mhm.
It's, yeah, it's very scary. It's like the
I
teachers are doing therapy, but they're not therapists,
exactly.
and the parents don't even know.
Which also bringing us back around to this issue where, the teachers are making these judgment calls about whether or not the parent should know this information, whether it's in the best interest of the child. How is the teacher
Yeah,
qualified to figure this out? And they might not know that the child's already in therapy, that there's all kinds of other things going on. And they've decided to take it upon themselves to act like their little therapist. They're like, oh no, the child trusts me. I'll have these conversations with them that really can undermine whatever may be going on in that child's life.
yeah.
Before
Laura,
we run out of time, I want to make sure we get to some of the thornier issues, though.
sure, go.
The question I don't know the answer to exactly. I think the biggest one in what's going on with Mirabelli is how much there is an obligation to proactively inform parents versus just not keeping things secret. And I think
Hmm.
that's the main thing that isn't quite clear because the lower court, if you look at the wording, I think he was really emphasizing that they can't participate in a social transition, that the school staff can't do that, right? That's mostly what he's emphasizing. But then you get this issue, well, if parents have a right to know, then doesn't somebody have an obligation to tell them? So it's a different level of talking about whether if they lie to parents, whether that's wrong. And I think we've conclusively said it is. But I know that on the other side, they're still going to argue, well, there's no obligation to tell, which is what this one law in California from 2024, AB 1955, focused on, is saying that a school district can't force a teacher to reveal this information, but then they can reveal it if they want, but they can't be forced to. But I
So
don't
this is what's
see, yeah,
confusing to me because they're constantly saying if you don't affirm, this child is at high risk of suicide. But if a child came into school and said, I want to end my life, they would be obligated to reach out to the parents. I mean, it's taking a little bit of an extra step, but if you're saying that um, trans kids are at a higher risk of suicide because of whatever your reasons are, it would follow to me that that child is now in a vulnerable group and parents should be informed that their child has said something that makes statistically a question of whether they have suicidal thoughts or vulnerabilities. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that they wouldn't inform a parent because if I mean, like Jamie has said before, they can't give your kid an ibuprofen without calling you for consent.
yeah, that was one of, thanks for that, because that was one of my things I could have mentioned at the beginning of the some of the totally irrational arguments being made, because that is one of the arguments they make is we can't tell parents because these kids may be prone to suicide.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute, you have to inform parents if you think this child is at risk for suicide.
Yeah.
That's insane that you're saying that that means you have to keep it secret. Um,
Yeah. It's all very insane.
Were there any other sticky points out of, are we all saying this right, Mirabelli?
Mirabelli, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot. I mean, to me, that's one of the central things that they're going to tease out. There's also this question that's kind of gotten confusing, this AB 1955 I mentioned. Some reports have been like, this overturns AB 1955. The case doesn't deal directly with it. So it's kind of a question, well, is there anything that survives? Because if parents have a right to know, then doesn't the school have an obligation to inform them? And I think that is not necessarily answered, um, not
Right.
explicitly answered. Then, the questions are going to be enforcement too going forward. Because, like I said, I think schools around here are going to try to find ways to not comply. And
Schools
of
and
course,
individual teachers too. I mean, you could have an individual rogue teacher I mean, when we know that this is happening, there are certain teachers that are actively encouraging this.
and then how do you find out though? This is the
Right.
thing. How do you prove this happened? That your complaint is of keeping secrets from you. Um, we also have ongoing, there's violations of federal law in terms of how they're keeping records because they will have the secret records that they won't let the parents see in under federal law. They're required to let parents see all the school records. That's being dealt with. The Department of Education had a investigation and findings that California was violating federal law. And then the state is now suing the Department of Education to prevent them from cutting funding. Potentially, they could cut all the funding. They're using that as a threat, potentially, that they can cut funding if we can't get the courts to get them to comply. And I'm saying I was concerned to see that we have no statement from the Department of Education about this other than this one little notice, but then they contradict it below. So I don't know that we're going to see compliance.
Yeah, like where's the teeth? How do we? Yeah.
Well, it should be, there should be teeth here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a Supreme Court decision. People are shouting about threats to democracy or whatever out there. And then it's when you see the state disregard a Supreme Court precedent, it's concerning. But yeah, I think the money potentially from the Department of Education is could be used to force compliance.
which is scary. It's scary that our public schools are in this situation.
Yeah.
I've always been a big believer in public school system, and recently I've just been really horrified at some of the things that are going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice. I really feel like the answer is they could just focus on academics and
Yeah,
we wouldn't have to have all these battles over all these, culture war issues. Shouldn't even be coming up. We shouldn't even care. I mean, I've heard people
yeah,
say, well, you're trying to control, you're putting your values into the classroom. I'm like, what are you talking about? I furthest thing from, I want everybody's values out of
yeah.
the classroom. I mean, there's only maybe a few things we all agree are wrong that are part of our society that 100% of people say, this is a value of American society, but it is not every little thing that the teachers prefer is not something that they get to instill in our children.
I did read a pretty interesting New York Times article a few months back that some of the districts that are having gains in performance are in states that you would have no idea would be the states moving up. So I think it was Alabama, Mississippi,
Mhm.
um, traditionally red states that were focused only on reading, writing, and these basics and didn't let a lot of this culture seep into their school curriculum. And now we're seeing that those students are better performing than the other, more traditional blue states. So there's a lot going on with our kids these days in a lot of ways, and schools really do feel like ground zero.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think schools in California are, for the most part, trying to raise academic. They come up with their answer to low test scores is more social emotional learning.
Hmm.
More focus on emotions. It must be the problem, they don't feel included because their identity isn't represented in the curriculum. These are the answers they're coming up with. And in Mississippi, they raised test scores, and particularly for Black children, by teaching them to read. They didn't do
What a
it.
novel idea.
Yeah. I mean, that literally is not what they're trying here. They literally, you go and see, how are we going to raise test scores for Black kids? And they say, well, we're going to have books with Black characters in them. That's the problem. Or we're going to have more, talking about your emotions. That's literally their solution in most of California.
Well, how's that working?
Yeah, it's not. And yet
Yeah.
there's still, I mean, it's great that we have this example, right? That we know that things are working somewhere, that they manage to succeed. So we could copy it if we had the will, but instead, yes, the schools are being used for ideological purposes.
Laura, we have to jump over
Mhm.
to our next guests, but I would like to ask you, where can listeners find you? I found you on X. Uh,
That's where to find me. I don't have the energy for too many platforms. So, yeah, I'm Laura Powell Esquire, and I have tons of stuff I put out on Twitter on this and all kinds of other issues.
you do. You have a great platform. That's why you had piqued my interest on this. Um, I would also like to ask if we see one of these cases, Little John or Foot, move up to the court, we would be really interested in having you come back, if you'd be interested in talking more.
Sure. Yeah. And I hope we do get one of these cases, right? That would be exciting to not have to wait too much longer.
Would be.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so much
agree.
for your time today, and we will put your links and everything in the show notes.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to our second half of Informed Dissent. Today for March the 7th. I think
Sixth,
spring,
seventh, yes.
yeah, the 7th. Spring, I think, is really in the air. Um, we have some really interesting conversationalists to have with us today. So this kind of developed organically. Kevin Waldman, I would say, kind of blew up a little bit on X maybe a week or two ago. Kevin, did it kind of was that the timeline?
Yeah, it was a little over a week ago. Yeah.
Okay. So Kevin came to a lot of people's attention on X over a research study that Kevin had published. And as soon as I read your study, I actually texted Ben because one of the things that I felt reading your study and having recently read Ben's book is, oh, we have this um, explanation or this deep dive into college campuses, into, the LGBT community and where it's at right now and what's happening on college campuses. And I just immediately said to Ben, like, hey, Ben, I want to reach out to Kevin and have him come on the show. Would you join us? Because I just felt like there was some level of, you were both seeing a cultural, like thing going on in college campuses that I felt like you could all kind of help us talk through. So Kevin, for background, where are you at and what did you do that got us all paying attention to you on X?
Well, first, thanks for having me join the conversation. I'm a big fan of all of you. So my story is actually quite similar to Ben's. I was in college later in life. I had a career and then shifted. It kind of led me to psychology, and I tried to dodge it, but unfortunately, you need to have these degrees for this. And so went to college at 33 at the University of Michigan, super liberal, gay guy, and I was impressed at the beginning because I was ignorant about a lot of these issues. And at the beginning, I'm like, this is so gay here. This is great. And then I realized it's really bad. It's a very one-sided narrative at the University of Michigan in particular. Love the school. It's a great institution. I'm not saying they're going to destroy your kids' lives, but these are still very important factors that I was witnessing. Particularly being an older figure in the gay world on the campus, a lot of these kids would talk to me and they're extremely confused. And I started to kind of compare almost to like when I was their age. I was living in New York City. I worked in the beauty industry. I could just kind of be gay. And didn't even know any trans people even in New York then. And so they exist, I know, but I'm saying I didn't have any experience with this. It wasn't pushed on me in any way, and so anything trans happened organically for me. And so my experience was quite different, and I started to see, uh, although I had my own marginalization and issues growing up in Ohio, this was this was psychological that I was witnessing. And so I decided I was already doing performative work anyway, where I was researching performance and first in men and then also in just behavior in general. I did a study called Performative Progressivism, which is on my website, which kind of led me to this, which is because in the performative progressivism study, we asked, do you essentially lie about how you feel about gender in order to survive on campus? And so in that one, 78% of the students said that they self-censor on the topic of gender in order to maintain
Wow.
social standing. 78%. And we interviewed, at that point, it was almost 1,000 people. And it was a survey, not an interview. I did interview also over 100. That led to the LGBTQ umbrella pressures on gay men study, which is the one that everyone's kind of sending around right now, which is wonderful. I'm so happy that someone found this. And so this is the thing this is the situation where we interviewed a number of students, only 49, but that's going to be replicated on other university campuses now. But we started to realize that there is a very strong pressure on the gay students to align with this trans ideology, whether they like it or not. And it's presented to them in a way, it's been manufactured where if you do not agree with this, you're out of the acronym and you cannot have a safe place on campus. And so yeah, that's kind of where the study brought me initially, was to ask that question to gay men. And that what we found was that the trans identifying students that took part, we interviewed extensively, just 11 of them. But there's a massive asymmetry. The trans cohort believes that the gay students need to align with trans ideology. They also agree they do not need to align with the gay ideology or the gay identity, which,
Okay,
okay, yes,
let's break this down a little bit.
yes.
So this was focused on your campus,
Yeah.
and you um, sought out gay men
Yeah.
and trans identified women.
So initially we wanted an equal balance of trans students and gay male students.
Okay. But
And
did were you seeking a certain trans cohort? Did you want them to be, so I'm just going to say it clearly so I think we all know. Were you seeking women who identified as men or non-binary, or were you seeking men who identified as women?
honestly, we were just seeking any trans identifying
Okay.
individual. Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
what you found was then you had a group of gay men step up and say, sure, I'll take part in your study.
Yeah.
And you had a group of trans identified individuals say, sure, I'll take part. And they were all women who identified as trans on
Yeah.
campus. Okay.
Yes.
And then you asked them questions about what? What were you asking them?
So it had three different sections. One was just about belonging in general. The other one was the contingency of belonging, and then it was like a speech climate. So and everything is super balanced in the study. We ask anything that I ask, do you feel unable to? We also ask, do you feel able to? And
Okay.
so it is balanced. We try and keep it as unbiased as possible. And what I found was that the trans students they were very open. They're not transgender, these people that we interviewed. None of them have medically transitioned. They identify as transgender. And so this is the issue that I had, where we couldn't find any medically transitioned students, and they couldn't lead us to any as well. I'm sure there are some, but I could not find any at Michigan. But now that this study has been successful, I think we've already heard from a number of universities that are going to let me replicate. And I want to get an equal balance if possible. I mean, even that means less gay students, but yeah, so these were trans identifying female to male, but they were not medically transitioned. They're just women that identified as transgender men.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the age group? How old were a lot of these participants?
So they were all just undergraduates. So it's 18 to 20. The oldest one was 23. Most
Oh,
of them were
you
like,
hit right into that.
yeah.
Ooh, okay. You hit right at that cohort age. So the gay men were saying essentially they felt like in order to be accepted, they had to embrace and go along with trans. But the trans identified individuals felt no such equal pressure to accept or embrace gays or lesbians. Is that
Yes. So 86% of the gay cohort said that participants said that they feel pressure to align with trans frameworks. Now, 84% of the gay cohort reported a lack of freedom to even express differentiation between the two. And then 78% of the gay cohort said that they believed if they expressed a differentiation, they would be excluded from the community and the campus because of the outspoken activist nature of the trans community. That's why. Um and so my approach is not it's to kind of investigate why this imbalance is happening, and there's a very um present imbalance of power in terms of the narrative of the gay or LGBTQ, and it's run by this cohort that aren't even transgender. They're allies, and they're my purpose isn't. Go ahead.
I mean, can I also hypothesize that some of them are also just straight?
Oh yeah. A
Okay.
lot and that's, listen, I'm not a mind reader, but as somebody who talks to a lot of people about this topic, you know, I can't say how someone can identify. It's not my responsibility, or it's not right. It's my responsibility is to, gather perspective based on of the data that is given to me. And a lot of this is, in interpretation, straight women who want community, but are also being told by the adults. The adults, all of this is they're a symptom of the cancer. The cancer is the adults that are creating this narrative
Mm.
and telling these students, um, you know, we're going to give you this identity, and simultaneously you're going to be hated for this identity that we're giving you.
Well, can I ask you a question? What is the framework, the trans framework that gay people felt afraid to, disagree with, and what was the gay framework or, ideology or understanding that trans identified people were um, unwilling or willing to engage with or agree with?
Well, first, let me just say that the gay students that participated in this particular study all like and accept the transgender community. Um, and I think that the framework that exists for them, in their belief that the trans community is kind of running the the gay community, is because that's the way it's structured on the campus, if that answers the question. So any sort of gay club or gay event or gay things that existed when you and I were 19, 20, these are now run by transgender identifying students.
Okay.
You don't really even see like a gay guy just run the gay club. It's a trans identifying female or male, or it is a queer student
Mhm.
that's not even gay. And it's the students, by the way, the gay students, they're not reporting that they're depressed. They're very anxious about this particular thing. And this is emerging adulthood is when you're supposed to be experimenting with your identity and being and failing by being honest and finding who your people are and what your identity really is, and being scripted and not able to do that is causing the distress. But the transgender community, I'm getting a little tangent here, but the transgender distress is just identity related. So there's that imbalance is the identity for the gay students doesn't cause distress. It's the alignment pressures. The transgender cohort, the identity causes the distress because it is so contingent upon external validation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But like just in terms of you were surveying and asking gay people how the pressure they felt to agree, were you giving specifics like, oh, that gender, I mean that sex is a spectrum, or that like did you have specifics about what we were talking about here, or was it kind of just this general like overall framework, overall ideology? I feel afraid to voice my opinion about any LGBT issues because this is the dominant voice.
Yeah, good question. So there's both of those. We in the interviews, I actually presented a number of statements from curricula at the university. And I said, would you feel comfortable challenging this? That kind of conversation was more like if the professors present a narrative, which is the transgender community is more oppressed than the gay community, which is, this we all know in this room, this is a very oppressed versus oppressor narrative on
Mhm.
campus in general. But to my questions were so the direct questions in the survey were more on based on personal experience, and then the interview was more when something is presented to you, how safe do you feel presenting your own perspective or challenging based on your own life experience? And that's where the gay students were saying, I absolutely would not um, challenge this narrative because I would be excluded from the community, or they don't want to be looked at as Republicans either or conservative. So gay conservative, God forbid, but when you're 22, I understand that direction. I really do. And so they're more afraid of that, I think, than anything else. So
I wrote down, I took some notes when I was reading your study, and one of the sentences I wrote down was there was maybe a lack of permissibility for reasonable or reasoned disagreement.
yeah.
So the gay students are basically reporting they don't feel like it's safe or they are able to even say, I disagree with this statement. So in some ways, they're self-silencing or feeling silenced by the cultural
Mhm.
experience on campus.
Yeah.
When you said that the trans-identified students did not report any of the same pressure
Mhm.
to align. Um, have you heard from any of your participants, or have you heard anything on campus since this picked up a little steam?
Yeah, I've heard from some of them, and it's all really positive. So that this is the thing. So, um, by the way, I'm seeking IRB for this and to move forward where I want names involved now. And because there are two of the trans participants would like to have their name on it. I can't legally do that because of the way I set it up with the University of Michigan. But I am now in the works of getting IRB for this, which means in the next version of
Wait, are they asking for their name on it like that they were a participant or that they want to be part of your like
they like
research team?
so they like that it's being circulated.
Okay.
And even though my thesis is that they're like part of the problem. So and the and but the thing is, this is what we're learning. They're willing to ruin, I'm generalizing here, but these are individuals who really want the spotlight in order to just self-destruct on camera. And I'm trying to explain it's being taught to them to do this to themselves. The woman that attacked Beth Bourne is another good example. Not to go on a tangent, but she is a mother who is so ingrained, like in her mind psychologically, and to this, she's so connected to this identity issue that she's willing to ruin her career, her life, everything to continue to defend it rather than just have the open dialogue. So I want the trans participants to be on camera with me having discussions because I think it would help illuminate this more. And they liked me. It wasn't like one thing that I've learned to do with all of these young people is to not educate them, is to illuminate things and start conversations. Once you try and educate someone who's been infected with this ideology, they will just call you a Nazi and tell me that I'm like a Republican Nazi or whatever. And so what I do now is I ask them to just tell me about their life and their experience and present opportunities for different you know um dial different conversations, but I don't tell them you're actually wrong. Even if I believe that, which in many cases I do, I don't challenge them that way.
Smart.
Yeah, actually, the don't try to educate them.
That was some learning curves that got me to that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I bet.
Are you're still on camp? Are you finished? Are you
I'm at Northwestern now. I'm in a graduate program there, and I'll be done next year.
okay? Um, so you're seeking to kind of replicate this on other campuses. Um, Ben, you were at Columbia and maybe a few years different. When did you run the basis of this, or when did you run your study, Kevin?
24.
24. Okay. Um, Ben, do you see parallels? I mean,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah.
Well, what's interesting is that when Kevin reached out to me the first time, because we've spoken once before, and the odd thing of us like returning to school both at the age of 33, like being gay men and finding ourselves just having really parallel experiences. And you said you worked in the beauty industry, right? Were you a hairstylist as well, or no?
Yeah, and a wig designer, yeah.
I
It's
mean,
so
Yeah.
it's
it's
so
so weird.
weird. It's
Yeah.
so weird. Um, Anyway, I mean, I guess it's not that weird for like two gay men to be hairdressers. Like, let's be honest. But like for us to have this parallel experience.
Yeah.
So what was your question?
Well, actually, I lost it. Wait.
Yeah.
Well, they're parallels.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, with the
was it a similar
parallels,
experience?
but
Oh
the
yeah.
other thing here is, um, I want to unpack a little bit is, the lesbian community maybe is different than the gay male community, but is there any sense of like the elders? Like you both came in as like elders and you had this experience or this background. Do young gay men look up to you? Was like, or was it they were trying to tell you you were wrong and they were right? Like, what's
Well,
that
I have a
dynamic like?
good question because Kevin, with your study, it was, as I understand it, just gay men, correct? And then trans-identifying females,
Yeah,
trans-identifying women.
yeah.
But it wasn't like you were just reaching out to those specifically. It's just no lesbians presented themselves to participate. Is that what how it was?
No, I was seeking gay men, but I will tell you, I am for sure including lesbians in the next round of this because I have heard from so many lesbians
I bet you
that
have.
I'm like, this is, I didn't know. And this is just another, like, I did not realize that the lesbian community aligns with kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
there,
So,
those of us that are left, yeah.
yeah.
right. But so this the trans identifying females that did participate, did they see themselves as gay men?
Oh, so we didn't get into that. That's an interesting question, though. And that wasn't part of the study. Um, but I think that it's not my place to say because it wasn't a part of the study. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
data isn't there but I mean, like I said, I've got my inkling that they're straight women,
Yeah.
which would mean that they would identify, I'm sure. But like I said, I don't have that data, so I can't speak on that.
Right. Okay.
Do you think that you would have run up to a little bit more resistance if you had framed questions and like, because you're saying you have gay men and trans-identified women. How did you even did you even explain to them how you were grouping them? Because you would have to have a basic knowledge of sex to
Mhm.
even choose who was in which group. And there could very likely have been trans-identified females who identify as gay men.
Yeah. I mean, in order to make this work, the university knew I was doing it. There was a lot of resistance. So I kept it as simple as possible. And when they finally said, move forward with it if you're going to do it, I had to just say, I just literally was gay males and trans identifying people. And it just happened to all be females. Um, and so that's just it was a very simple first round. I've explained to people that have given me, a little pushback. This is not, it's a small cohort and it's start the conversation. I'm not trying to say this is how everyone thinks. I'm saying I wanted to investigate based on my own observation.
Actually, there was a
So that's crazy though that you you proposed a study saying that possibly gay men are feeling pressured to go along with this, and they gave you a little bit of pushback saying they didn't want to find out, or that they didn't believe that there was any legitimacy to the premise, or what was the pushback exactly? Were they just afraid they didn't want to get into this can of worms?
I think so. I think that there's something way bigger than I could ever fathom that happens on these campuses. And I had already, when I started to witness certain narratives in classrooms, I stayed quiet in the classroom because I'm older. I was confused. I also didn't care at the beginning. When I started to see it getting progressively, I mean, every classroom you see these conversations. I did make a few reports to the university, and I think they thought I was going to become a problem. Um, I even said that my brother, who is also a hairstylist and a gay guy, I have a gay twin, and at the time, I actually said my brother works for this news network. I don't know why I said this because then I was blacklisted. But I was so concerned at that point, that I was like, somebody let me do this study. Um, and so, yeah, I think the pushback it wasn't towards me specifically. It's you can't ask these questions, period. Doesn't matter who you are.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so if they're not going to let a liberal gay guy ask them, they're not going to let anybody. So, I had to really reason with them and yeah.
What were some of the things that you were seeing that you were reporting to them that you felt that they should that kind of take some action on? What were those things that were starting to concern you that you were bringing to their attention?
So I reported two professors, and these weren't like, they're good people, these professors. I'm not saying that they should be fired, but two lessons were just shocking. And it's anti-gay the way they're teaching it, in my opinion. It's so trans-focused and anti-gay that you're making us, particularly white gay kids, hate themselves through this kind of education. And that's my perspective. Like I said, I'm not a professor. I'm just somebody who was sitting in the classroom, but a couple months in, I'm like, this particular individual teaching this class is so performative in the pro-gay that I actually think it's anti-gay. And I brought a number of curriculum things from items from the curriculum or conversations and literature and said, I think that this is a problem. I wasn't saying let's get someone fired. I was just saying I'm gay and I'm like 35 and this is a little weird. Maybe you didn't know this was happening. And so those were on file and you know, like I said, I never made any complaint publicly. It was just like a professional, you know,
Yeah, like,
cons
hey, you might want to look into this curriculum because I as a gay man am feeling very like someone who wasn't maybe because these you're older, but if you're talking about a 19-year-old boy that's just kind of coming into his own, this could be very kind of detrimental to his understanding of himself.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. I
And
mean, I say all the time, like we're seeing young gay kids, especially the effeminate young gay men and the really butch young gay young lesbians. They are, and this is much younger usually than college, but they are unable to even conceptualize themselves as homosexual because they see their same-sex attraction as evidence that they are trans, that they are actually the opposite sex.
yeah,
I,
wow.
I think, Lauren, that's a, a great segue if we want to jump over to Ben's piece for a minute from the Atlantic. I mean,
Yeah.
Ben, I feel like that's part of what you were sharing is that
Mm.
young people who are most likely to grow up to be homosexuals, like all of us um, are getting a real different message now
Yeah.
about what those signals are, what what their behaviors, point towards as children, that they're being told now, um,
Hmm.
you're trans or
Well, and what's interesting too is like just to follow up on what you guys were just talking about, there's this, it's not, there's a way to, let's say, combat or fight against racism, or there's a way to fight against sexism, or there's a way to fight against, anti-trans discrimination, anti-gay discrimination, whatever. But what's really weird is, you're talking about, like Kevin, you were saying these like white gay men who are like kind of really taught to like hate themselves, which I completely related to. I mean, when I write in my book about like, it's hard to write like, oh, I wanted to kill myself because it's like I didn't want to be like, oh, try to manipulate or coerce to get people to sympathize with me. But I was, in fact, more suicidal than I had been since I was 19 and in a psych ward. So it was like, but what was interesting is, you know, we used to have it where it was like, let's empower minorities, let's encourage resilience,
ah,
let's
Yep.
empower, but it's flipped to actually let's tear down
Mhm.
others. Let's engender a shame and a guilt.
Yeah.
And somehow that will facilitate the change that we're looking to achieve. I don't think anybody wins in that. I think that's a super toxic framework that's really, really damaging for everyone involved. And it doesn't just affect gay people or white gay people. I mean, I think about I think about friends who have kids and stuff, and I'm like, especially if they are white, which is so funny to think, but I'm like, this poor kid, like he's gonna be sent to college, and he's gonna be told from the jump that he is the reason for every ill in this country and around the world, and it's going to be pounded into his brain, and it's going to be rough. And so what is he going to do? He's going to have one option, which is to, if he maybe is a more empathic person or sensitive or just vulnerable to it, he's going to fall for it. Or he could possibly react and go the absolute opposite way. Find some kind of solace in white identity and ethno, centric identity where he is rebelling and his brain is saying, these people want to harm you and make you hate yourself, and he'll find voices that are will affirm him in that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
human and it doesn't take it's human nature. And so people are failing hey everybody, the universities are failing your kids, failing your kids miserably, and you should know.
Wait. After the first segment we just recorded, the elementary schools are also failing and the
Yeah,
middle
Yeah.
schools. So
yeah,
there you go.
they're all failing your
They're failing.
kids, they're failing your kids.
Ben, how did the Atlantic piece, how did this come about? Can you share? Because this is okay.
Question.
Frame up who the Atlantic is not. This is not a conservative outlet by any means.
Yeah. So it was great. I mean, how did this happen? So months and months ago, I noticed that, a couple editors and big folks, started following me on Twitter, and
Mhm.
I guess they learned had read about my book. And then as far as I know, I believe they just saw other coverage of it, and so they were just grew curious, and they reached out, and they were like, oh, and what had happened was I had pitched the Atlantic in the past. Actually, I think pretty good pitches. Like when I was rereading them, I'm like, oh, this is good. Like, because I was really looking to draw the parallels between what was going on in Iran and going on here, and just kind of wanting to put that out for people. And it got ignored essentially, which is no big. I mean, they probably get a gazillion pitches. And so when the editors got in touch, they were like, "Oh yeah, you've pitched us?" I said, "Yeah, I've actually pitched you before." And they said, "Oh, who did you reach out to?" I said, "I don't know. I just sent it to Global or Ideas, the in section and stuff like that." So they looked at those pitches and they were like, "Okay, I don't know if the timeline is passed for this, but if you have any other ideas, I'm also going to read your book and see if there's anything that we can generate from this, like for a possible contribution." So I responded and I said, "Okay, great. Here are just a couple things that I'm thinking that could be good for Atlantic readers." And they weren't even so much around this specific. I mean, they were, but it was actually different topics that I was dealing with, like whether it's like scrupulosity and the kind of righteousness that social justice warriors kind of get for that feeling, and the pressure to conform, and also the fear and the shame of erring or transgressing, and how similar that is to any kind of experience in fundamentalist religious communities, that kind of thing. And I can't remember what the other one was, but they did want something along these lines as well, specifically, which I was super glad about. I was really, really happy to do. So then we just started this dialogue and it just went from there. And so that was how it came to be.
If you don't mind, can I read just a little passage from this piece? Um, I've read a ton of your work, and the closing paragraph in this one, it just really kind of struck me. You're talking about, what do we do about these kids who feel distress, especially, the effeminate men, the little boys or the masculine little girls. And your final paragraph says, "My suggestion is to tell him the truth. The difference he feels is real. He is unlike most of his peers. Throughout history, there has always been a minority of people who share the interests of and behave more like the opposite sex. And he happens to be one of those people. And this means from time to time, he might be on the receiving end of cruelty because people often fear what they don't understand. In many situations, he might feel like he doesn't quite fit in because society is organized in a way that suits the majority. What all of this means is that he will need to be just a little bit stronger than his peers. Soon enough, he'll find others who are like him, and all will be well. In the meantime, let him wear the dress and carry the doll if he pleases. Boys can do those things too." I love the resilience in that, but it also, I think, is hard because in almost ways circling back to Kevin, um, he will find others who are like him. I worry that the others who are like him is becoming just this smaller and smaller group.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, Kevin, when Kevin was talking about that, and Kevin, you absolutely, but I was thinking about that when you were speaking because you were saying, like, did you find that when you were talking to students that you're like almost in some case, so many cases speaking an entirely different language? Like you're operating from a kind of a framework that's now extinct. I mean, that's like
Hmm.
we are operating on a different plane, and I've noticed that even in the responses to the Atlantic article, like the pushback or the counter arguments, I'm like want to engage, but I'm like this is incoherent because you're coming from like we have to go like so far back to like this is the birds and the bees. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this is what sex is. You know what like this did you find that?
Well, I will say, first of all, one thing that um I love that you tell a story based on a real experience versus like you're not so like what I was saying about myself. I don't like educating. I just like telling like a story and so it's um I kind of got lost for a second. Sorry. I just I think it exists because, but I think it's going to start to grow more because of people like you who are going to start to, I think, become a role model for young gay kids. And we need to start becoming people like me as well. Unfortunately, I feel a little bit responsible uh, to also unfortunately become one of these roles because it's a big responsibility to mold something for a young person. I'm not a parent. I never thought I would ever work with young people, but there's such a lack of leadership in the gay community for young people that unfortunately I'm like I have to be a part of that. And I think you don't even know you're doing that and you're doing it. And I think what will change is when people, I mean, we've met, now other people will meet, it just will happen. And the more people like you or like me, um, particularly you telling your story, and it's a resilient story. And it's unfortunately, there are kids that are going to have to suffer a bit. I mean, this is the thing to try and avoid that by pretending that their identity is something that it's not is actually making them worse. And I also write as well about a kid is going to go through hell for a little bit sometimes. If this is manufactured in a way that it's going to be identity focused, they're going to be failing. If it's more, let's let them get through it and kind of walk them through it and have them experience a little bit of pain, but not lie to them. And also explain to them, like you said, this is you're different and you're gonna get and sometimes different things scare people. I'm going on a tangent again, sorry. But my thing is I think leadership is how we're gonna fix this. Um, and so I have some ideas that I'm gonna email you about. But I think that
Do you feel like the gay men that you were talking to in your study, though, was there a dearth of leadership? Like, do you think that they were open to it?
the leadership in their lives are the part of the problem that we all think that
Oh.
we all discuss is that they're telling them that they're part of this acronym instead of just
Hmm.
you're a gay kid and like you're just different. It's cool that you want to like dress up or do whatever. I mean, I went through these phases too, not like drag or whatever, but was very, I mean, I went through all these. It's part of it. And it's part of being gay is discovering weird identities, and some of them stick and some of them don't. But to tell them, a little kid, oh, he's trans. What?
Yeah, you
It's,
foreclose on any other option.
yes, exactly. And so the piece in the Atlantic, which is extraordinary, is exactly what every parent should read and be approaching this topic that's so polarizing now. And there's a lot of pressure on the parents too. So, but leadership, I think, is how we're gonna potentially, in my opinion, um, contribute to maybe getting back to sort of a realistic place of gay culture.
I liked that concept, and Lauren talks about it more philosophically, but this idea of like, foreclosing on for the gender nonconforming child who most likely would grow up to be gay, if we foreclose on those experiences, if we foreclose on their exploring their sexuality because we give them a puberty blocker, or we foreclose on it by telling them, this is who you are, um, I think that it also has, I don't know how to explain this, but has radically shaped gay culture in that um, the wideness of gay culture has become very narrow. I remember growing up, and part of that exploration part was knowing I was different, pretty much understanding I thought I was a lesbian. But I remember that first pressure was to shave my head and put on combat boots. And explore that identity to me was to be very masculine presenting and not understand, like feeling like that was the only way I could signal to other people, hey, I'm a big homo over here. I don't know how else to show you this. Be hot, except for doing this and throwing my keys on a car, like on a carabiner and like those ways, like exploring it. But then coming to this place now where I'm, femme presenting and, feel very comfortable, in the way I appear. But I just feel like gay kids today have none of that. Like they just
No,
have
because as soon as you start experimenting or you cut your hair as a girl or you want to wear a dress as a little boy, you're not gay anymore, you're trans.
they,
And again, we foreclose on their ability to explore their identity and come into their actual identity.
Ben, you, you and Lauren were talking briefly before we hit record. The pushback on this Atlantic piece has not been pretty.
Well, no, it hasn't. But, I mean, it's expected. It's like, I guess I would say it's like maybe 50-50. The most interesting, if you are an Atlantic subscriber, I think the most interesting comments and responses to read are the comment section on the article itself, because those are like, Atlantic readers are like, center left, liberal, they're I don't know. I feel like the people that are most likely to be reached, that can be reached on this issue. So there's a lot of diversity of an opinion in there, and it's a good kind of way to gauge like what the responses are. Because if you go on Blue Sky, I mean, oof, it's
Are you
nuts.
on Blue Sky, Ben?
Well, yeah, but I don't post really. Like I've posted 4 times since I've joined, and it's like I don't look at what the response because I don't have like any followers. So I was just like, oh, I'll just put this out there. I think I follow. I don't even know who I follow, to be honest. I don't know if I follow anybody. I maybe follow like 5 people. I don't know. Anyway, I just find it like such a like just a useless. There's just no whatever, like nothing good will come from this like at all. But the reason why I posted was because someone messaged me and were like, can you please put this on Blue Sky, people need to see it. It was in response to one of my Substack pieces about Blair Peters, the quote unquote queer
Yeah.
surgeon. And so I was like, okay, sure, yeah. So I put this on there, and then after I published this Atlantic piece, I was like, oh well, I'll just put this on there too. Like it kind of just put it in my mind, like, oh, I should maybe just put it out there. I know it's going to get blasted, but maybe there'll be someone, to do it. So yeah, the Blue Sky response, and then on X, I just wrote this in for my Substack, but I think like over the past number of months, I think other people have commented on this too, that it seems like a lot of Blue Sky, or what someone called Blue Scream or Blue Screamers,
Are coming
they've
back.
started migrating back to X, I think. So I think that a lot of them have found it. So yeah, those folks have been really super vocal in opposing it. But overall, I mean, then there's the messages of support. So you're talking about, there's a couple things that Kevin was saying, the parents, the pressure on the parents, but also the leadership. One thing is leadership is that like, I don't know, maybe a lot of listeners are like, I'm sorry, I feel like there's like a gazillion leaders out there that are constantly in my kid's face being like, oh, here's how to be blah 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 blah, like, or whatever. Like there is leadership, but they've been cowed
Well,
in
there's
silence.
influence. There's
There's
influencers. Yeah.
influence, but also there is gay leadership within these organizations. They're just abdicating their responsibility and their duty,
Yeah.
completely. There, it's not like there aren't people in those organizations. So people have asked, they'll be like, how many people do you think in GLAAD or HRC or wherever do you think are just completely going along with this? Like they can't all possibly be. And I was like, honestly, I don't really know. I think the same thing. Like, surely there has to be folks in there that are like, and an individual who I'm not going to name, I can't go into all the details, reached out to me and said I worked at, I'm not going to say the organizations, but these organizations, named two of them for 15 years. I saw all of the craziness up close. I really appreciate this. And we had a conversation yesterday. And this person is still in touch with individuals within these organizations. And they have a lot of responsibility. And they agree with his dissenting opinions. I think one of the first things they spoke about was males and women's sports. They're like, no, obviously. Well, so they talk about I can't do it because I have these radical kids with when and he was like the same kids that are going into Columbia's library and taking of
The
course
same
they're the
straight
same
women
one,
in
and we
women's
knew that.
studies.
We
Yeah,
all knew that. We all knew that. Like it's the same people. It's these radicalized young people, and they are vicious. He's like, they're scared of them.
Oh
They
yeah.
are scared of them. I've talked to another very higher up at an international organization who's been super wonderful and forthcoming. And yeah, it's like these younger people that have been brought on are running the show. It's a red guard, and these folks are held hostage by them.
Can I say
Yeah.
something quick? Um, on a totally unrelated topic, I wrote a piece in The Hill about performative behaviors being a threat to higher education. And I co-wrote it with somebody, Forrest Rom, and we heard from a number of professors, and I had a conversation with one of them on Zoom. Again, like I can't say who it is because it's from a Gmail account, they don't want to be named, and they told me they're not afraid of the administration, they're afraid of the students.
Wow.
Yes, I'm like, that's, but
Wow.
still, it's the adults that caused it by letting the students have that kind of freedom to just destroy a campus over
Yeah.
something that they don't even have the facts on. But regardless if they do or don't, the 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 understanding that they're allowed to ruin lives is
Yeah.
something that is already like we should just start with that. Like you can't ruin someone's life because you don't agree with them. And so these professors out there who yeah, they're afraid of the kids. They're not even afraid of losing. I mean, they're afraid of losing their job, but for reasons that
Because of the kids.
yeah,
Because the kids will get
absolutely.
them fired. Yeah. And especially if you're a professor, working as a professor at PhD level, like there are not a lot of opportunities, and there are vastly more people with PhDs than there are opportunities for you to work in your field. So if you get one of these jobs as a professor on these college campuses, you better hold on tight
Yeah.
because there are not that many. Ironically, there are not that many positions open for people with PhDs in you know, weird shit, honestly, some of them.
And there's also like professors, the ones that don't agree with what's happening, I've had to understand that they're human beings too with lives. And so, like, one of them in particular at the University of Michigan, who reached out to me, we ended up having drinks, and he told me, I'm like, you need to speak up. Like, I can't, all of you are coming secretly forward with your Gmail accounts and your like alias but why don't you just say something? Um,
Yeah,
and he said, my kid's in rehab right now. I just can't risk like my family's been through enough. And I'm like, oh my God. It's just I get that too. I'm saying like I can't ask this person to put everything on the line when I forget that they have like their own life. And so
yeah,
even the ones that want to speak out, I feel are just they've got other things going on.
yeah. I mean, it comes back to the fact that like we have allowed people to have their lives ruined on just people's differing opinions or one small comment or just anybody who disagrees with them if they make enough noise. their lives could be ruined. I mean, that's a big cost to ask the average person to take on when
Yeah.
it, especially if it doesn't directly affect them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
that's very scary.
the individual. I mean, the individual I was speaking with that doesn't, is very hesitant, doesn't want to go on the record because of the, and they're like, yeah, but I so admire you for being brave, and I'm like, I'm scared every single day. Like, this is not whatever you think is brave. This is not bravery. I just found myself in a situation where I maybe it was because being in a situation where I was older in my 30s and in these spaces in the university where it was like I'm engaging with this is what I'm engaging with, and I can't not think about it critically. I can't just turn off my brain. If I'm 18, 19, 20, and that's what makes us really inconvenient, people like us, because for the folks that are just trying to indoctrinate, these kids are just like not blank slates, but really there's not a lot of software to overwrite, that they're kind of like, hey, wow, this is, and they hit them with what it is. This is makes you righteous. This is the enemy. This is what you can do. And and so I didn't find myself like, oh, I'm gonna be but I did say to this individual, I said, I eventually got to a point where I was like, I can't not say something. Did I deal with repercussions immediately? Like, like for me specifically, one of the biggest turnarounds was writing that Substack piece, and then my whole FMFA program freaking out, and workshop being canceled, and DEI being da 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 da, and I was like, "Psh, I'm out of here." But what happened, like I've said this before, like I didn't die, and it was horrible, but the sky didn't fall, and it does make you stronger. It makes you like, okay, once you get through that, and then suddenly people start emailing you or messaging or opening up, and they saying, oh, I had that same experience. It does, but you do have to walk through it. But sitting from one side, you see, and that's what it is. You look at the backlash, whether it's Blue Sky or wherever it is, and you see people that get trashed for speaking up, and it's just a warning sign for everybody around them, like, this is what we do, this is what happens when, I mean, like, the arguments, the counter arguments aren't coherent. So what do? They've started going on Goodreads and adding negative ratings to my book, because that's what they do. They can't, because they, as far as I know, you can't do it on Amazon if you can't prove that you bought the book. Someone
Okay.
told me that. So, like, but on Goodreads, you can just go on there and just that. So that's what they're doing. They're starting to go on Goodreads, and it's like anything to fight and to silence and to degrade, because they don't have um a hill to stand on, but with the pressure on the parents, like, with the response in terms of the backlash, I suppose, is that what is abundantly clear to me now, and I just put this in a Substack piece last night. What's abundantly clear to me is how deeply liberal and progressive parents have fallen for this framework that every kid is born with this innate magical gender identity, and it's the parent's job to sit back and to wait for it to be revealed, to wait for that kid to reveal it. And on the day that that kid finally does, that it is their job to affirm it, and that gender identity supersedes material sex, so that the job of the parents is to facilitate that child's body aligning with that inner magical gender identity, even if that means even if that means denying them sexual maturity, denying them a healthy, growing up into a healthy adult. They are very much operating from this framework, like, and it's and so letting the kids lead, this idea of letting the kids lead, is one of the most consequential and darkest, because we've all talked about it, I'm sure. Like, the parent's job is to help a kid make sense of the world.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah, you should
abdicated
be
that
facilitating reality,
facilitating
not,
reality, and what they've
yeah,
been doing is handing over the reins to the child to construct their own understanding of what
right.
reality is. It's We're all in for a really wild ride, a really wild ride, for parents that have abdicated their responsibility and allow their kids to do this.
Yeah.
And I, yeah, it's
Well, what's crazy is that it's not just the gender thing in which they've abdicated their responsibility. It's with so much of the other stuff. So we have these young adults now who had never been grounded properly in reality and think their feelings supersede reality and everyone else's rights and everybody else's comfort, and anything that is even slightly discomforting to them is violence. I mean, so we now have young adults operating on the emotional maturity level of a toddler.
Mhm.
Oh
So
my
we
Lord.
have,
The
Oh, and then there's
emails. Oh my God. I
another layer
sent,
to this, though. I can add another layer to that.
yeah.
So in my program at Northwestern, and I'm grateful to be there, yada yada yada. Okay, they 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 teach, okay, for I mean it's a prestigious university, Northwestern, and the program I'm in is it's adults, and we are learning to become therapists. It is an affirmation only model. You really can't challenge, and so like I stay quiet in this program. I've learned that they don't like resistance. They teach at this university that when someone comes in to get therapy, you just have to affirm them. And so when in reality, that's not how this is going to work. So like when someone, if a young trans individual comes in, transitioning should be the final option. It's really not the beginning. And so, but like you're saying, we're training the parents to, and it's all cycle. Like all of these things are, and then even like when you go, okay, let's get them professional help. The professional is part of the system that's broken because they're just going to affirm it instantly and then get them on the medications. And so we need stop and let the like the article in the Atlantic, just let these people figure out their lives and let it be painful for a minute, potentially. Half the time it's not even that painful. But
yeah,
this,
it's discomfort. People
yeah,
have
yeah,
widely just decided that any kind of discomfort is excruciating pain. And that
yeah,
again is a part of maturing into an adult, is being able to discriminate between discomfort and pain. And we have abdicated our responsibility in teaching young adults that, and they are falling apart and they are very fragile, and it's sad.
yeah.
But I feel like, I mean, you could probably speak better to this, but I feel like the affirmation approach doesn't just apply to gender.
No, no, no,
It
no.
kind of it applies to everything.
Like there are even I'll give you an example. I sat through a lecture at Northwestern and the professor was saying we were just doing like scenarios, and the scenario was if it's a conservative client that comes into your office, and they word it in a way. These people, these Trump supporters, these are closed-minded people. I'm like, our job is not to care about that. Our job is to let the person tell us their life experience and then provide perspective on how to make them make the best choice for them by listening to them, not judging them. And so, but to kind of say like what you're saying, like it's political, it's on Israel. Like, what does this have to do with everything? That they're all, it's a web. All of these things
Yeah.
tied together. I could go on and on about that, but I'll stop. But you're right though. I agree with you, I should say. I think it's not just about the gender. Gender is one part of the web of all this nonsense that it's all designed to get us angry and hyperbolic and fearful and um yeah, it's
Well,
just
you heard it here, folks. Here first, folks. Don't send your kids to school and don't send them to a therapist either.
no, therapy will just screw them up.
Jeez.
Oh my God.
Well, I guess it's a good thing we can plug organizate like, Therapy First. That is
Yeah.
an organization that's really great. That's, or the, what is it?
Yes, there are wonderful organizations. There are many. Yes.
Yeah. And oh gosh, what was that? What is Kevin this other organization in the
Open Therapy Institute.
that's what it is.
Yeah, they're a great organization. I have a piece that I co-wrote. Somebody uh presented an idea. So I have my first thing coming out with them, I think, next year. So They're an amazing one. Yeah. There are plenty of places that are, but they're growing. They're still budding. You know, the system has already kind of created this need for places like Open Therapy Institute.
Yeah.
And so I think Andrew, who started that, is responding to kind of what we're all talking about here, the culture, which is designed to kind of keep things messed up. And so we'll see more of that. That's kind of, and I actually do have a little bit of hope because like I said, people like you who are writing these books and telling your story, I I think there's a big future for you, and I think that things like Andrew at Open Therapy, same thing. That it's leadership eventually, but right now, I think we're seeing these organizations that are small but responding to the problem that we're all talking about. Yeah.
So I think we should probably wrap up. What I'd like to do is, Kevin, I'd like to just get a sense of where you're going next. So you mentioned you're wanting to replicate your study at other universities. We'll be graduating in about a year. So what's your next steps, and then where can people find you?
So my website is psychform.com, which is a separate entity from anything I'm doing at Northwestern. It's a private research lab, and I have received a large grant and IRB approval. So I'm actually conducting a study now that is at 5 universities about the influence professors have on students, perspective on Western culture. So it's kind of different, but this is another thing. It ties into everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
The West is the same thing as gender. It's, this influence that you just mentioned. So that's going to be a big one because it's 2,500 students. And yeah, we're hoping to replicate the study that you read about on Psych Forum that was discussed on Twitter. And so and I want to do more identities involved. So I want to definitely do lesbians and more trans people. And yeah, so there's a lot in the works. And
People can find you on X at
send me an X at Kev Waldman, or my website, Psych Forum. And I did start a Substack, which is also called Psych Forum. So yeah, let's build a community and all work together.
Perfect. And Ben, let's just make sure we plug your book for you and your Atlantic piece this week. So where can people find your book?
Yeah, where books are sold. So Cis White Gay, The Making of a Gender Heretic,
Where books are
Amazon.
sold, except for in Portland, Oregon, where they
Yes.
didn't carry it. But yes.
No, but yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So yeah, you can find me there, and then I'm on X at Ben Appel. And then I do have a Substack newsletter that you can subscribe to. And I also, what's been cool is talking about community. On Tuesdays in the evening, I've been hosting like a virtual cis white gay book club. And so for subscribers with yearly paid memberships to my Substack, which is $50 for the year. And so we sign on, and it's really cool. It's just we chat, but we talk about all of this stuff, and it's freely, and it's all off the record. And so we've been having some really cool discussions. So the next one is on Tuesday. So if anybody wants to sign up, you can go to my Substack and get the information there.
I'm just going to say, I love that of all of the things that we find challenging with all of these new technologies, there are ways to use these. There are ways to meet people through Substack and then use Zoom and then find those community niches again. So I applaud you for creating something like that where we can bring people together in that way, using the new technology and not just finding all of the negatives with these technologies.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
well,
thank you
I'll
both,
invite
you
you back.
guys. It was great.
I mean, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening this week to Informed Dissent. If this episode was useful to you, please like it, subscribe, and share. It is the best way for us to help reach people who we think need to hear it. In the wake of Maribel v. Bonita, the LGBT Courage Coalition will be releasing a letter that parents can share directly with their school districts. We know that these court victories matter, but we also know that what happens in these courtrooms and then what happens in a school hallway are two very different things. Our job now is to help families understand what these rulings actually mean for them and how to use it. That letter is going to be coming soon on our website, so stay tuned. I also want to say this part clearly. The conversation with Ben, Kevin, and Lauren this week was really interesting. I didn't add that I too have had a few conversations with individuals in LGBTQIA plus legacy organizations. But we are watching what is happening with our legacy organizations and the leadership right now. And we have thoughts. But more than that, I just want to keep reiterating that we have an open door. So if you are someone in leadership or who's worked at HRC, GLAAD, Lambda Legal, ACLU, or any of these other major organizations, or if you're just someone who's inside these spaces and you're tired and you want to talk, our email is always open. So reach out. And we mean that sincerely. Our community deserves an honest conversation, and we are not afraid to have it. So until next time, like, subscribe, share, and as always, stay informed and ready to dissent.